Okay, I think we're a couple of minutes just before we start. So there are a couple of things I just want to say. Welcome to everyone who's here for the session, a crash course in emergency planning for events. This session sponsor is IATSE 891. They're the union behind entertainment, if you haven't heard. In the meantime, it's IATSE.net if you'd like to go and visit our sponsors, without whom these sessions could not be possible. My name's Will Heller, for anybody I haven't introduced myself to yet. I am the Performing Arts and Events Safety Advisor for Actsafe. I work closely with Don Parman. And first, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge traditional lands that we all live on and gather today. And although this meeting is online, we still each enjoy the pleasure of living and working within an Indigenous territory. We'd like you to take a moment, if you haven't already, to take a look at the website www.nativeland.ca. That's www.nativeland.ca in order to determine which native lands that you might be on, and be welcome to share those in the chats or throughout the conversation at the conference as you will. Today's session is presented by Simon Hunt. He's got 25 years of emergency management experience through work with various governments and as a consultant. He's a current public safety coordinator for the Shambhala Music Festival, where he oversees a safety team of more than 1,000 volunteers across 6 different safety programs. The Shambhala Music Festival have been innovators in event safety. They've pioneered harm reduction services for North America and are world pioneers in mass gathering medicine. The way we're going to manage questions throughout the course of this session is that if you could just pop it into the Q&A function, we'll allow you to do it anonymously, I believe. And otherwise, you can just pop it into the chat, both of which are located at the top right corner of your screen. And then I'll just ask Simon intermittently throughout the course of his session questions that are relevant to the time. So once again, thank you very much, Simon, for coming, and welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the opportunity today. I'm just going to see if I can fire up my presentation. All right. Are you able to see it? Okay.
Thumbs up. Good.
You're getting a thumbs up? Okay. I'm just getting things just a little bit more set up so I can see what's going on. That's good. The joys. Okay. I am just dealing with one more. Oh, there it is. I'm just making it so I can see everybody and my presentation at the same time. There we are. That's better. Fantastic. Well, yeah. Okay. Now I got things rolling. Thank you very much, Will, and to Actsafe for the opportunity today to present. And thank you, everyone, for coming to this session. My name is Simon Hunt. A couple of little items before we get rolling. As Will mentioned, I totally welcome questions and discussion during my presentation. Another important fact to share with you is please take screenshots of my presentation so you don't have to worry about trying to scratch down too many notes. And thirdly, our friend Andrea is going to put a PDF document that I have created up in the chat so you can download it. It's full of resources and references, so don't try to scratch down any website addresses while we're presenting, because I'll be able to give them to you at the end. So yeah, let's dive in. So yeah, a little bit about myself. Been in the emergency management business for about 25 years. I've done everything from the bottom all the way to the top, from rappelling out of helicopters into forest fires. I've been international or nationally recognized for my work in search and rescue. I've been a forest fire specialist. And I also played a senior role in emergency coordination during the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympics. I've worked at every level of government, but mostly I've worked with the federal government, and I've had my own consulting company since 2013. And Will mentioned, yeah, my recent relatively new role. I'm new to the live event industry, becoming the industry's first public safety coordinator with Shambhala Music Festival back in 2018. If any of you recollect, in 2017, there was a forest fire that was a concern that was nearby at the festival, and I helped them actually negotiate their way through that challenge, which enabled them to be able to continue to complete the end of their festival. Yeah, lastly, I am a performing artist as well. I'm a house music drummer, producer, and a DJ. So that's a little about me. So, emergency planning for events. If there were 3 objectives that I wanted to get through to you over the next hour, it's easier than you think. There's lots of benefits, and it's highly applicable across all sorts of event planning. And then lastly, as I've sort of hinted earlier, I'm going to provide you with some tools and resources to send you on your way to support you with your planning. Emergency planning does not need to be expensive or complex. It's not supposed to be scary. It's actually pretty darn straightforward. You follow some ingredients that I'm going to share with you, and you'll end up with a great plan. So emergency plans are like omelets. There's a few basic common principles, and then there's a whole lot of specific things, but you just use those basic ingredients to call it an omelet. And these 7 points are more or less what we call your beaten egg. This is what's going to be in every single emergency plan to make it an emergency plan. And the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to start going through these ingredients with you. So the first ingredient, all emergency plans need a planner. The plan is not a document. The plan is actually a person. It's a living thing. It's alive, and someone needs to take ownership for it and be accountable. The second ingredient, and which is probably the largest ingredient of all, is the homework that you have to do during the pre-planning phase, as you're going to create an event. Like any kind of project or event, sound planning leads to successful implementation. I think of an analogy like, has anyone here done like a home reno? And at the beginning, you start knocking out walls, and then you find all these things that you didn't realize until you got into it. And you didn't anticipate how many trips you were going to make to the hardware store. And did you anticipate all the tools that you need to buy? And did you buy the cheapest ones, or did you get sucked into the better ones for the bonus set? But, planning is a journey. And so the more that you can uncover and understand before you go on that journey, the more successful you're likely going to be, and the more adaptable you'll be at adjusting to the different kinds of challenges that arise as you develop your event. So 2 documents that I've added into the PDF that I think are really great for helping you decide how, where to look, what you need, are the British Columbia Major Planned Event Guidelines that were developed in 2014. And then there was another parent document or sister document developed in 2017 called the Public Health Guidelines for Major Planned Events. I can imagine that after the last couple of years, we'll see some revamping of these documents. But really what I'm trying to say is that, integrating safety and emergency planning into the structure of your event as you're creating your event will mean for a lot more sound planning in the long run. So one of the areas that you will uncover and look into as you're planning your event from a safety and emergency planning perspective, there's two terms I wanted to share with you here, and that's the hazard, and that's really, in essence, it's like anything that can cause harm is a hazard. It could cause harm to a people or to property, to economy or the environment. So a hazard is something that can cause harm to something that means a lot to us, that's important to us, like people. And then a risk is like something that you can actually measure in the forms of an equation. And so risk, when we look at risk and try to calculate risk or determine risk, we look at what is the likelihood of something happening multiplied by the consequence. And so it's pretty easy to imagine, low consequence could be you skin your knee, and, high consequence could be a death. But yeah, when you think about risks, those are sort of the outcome. Hazards only harm people when things are like people are exposed to things. And so when you think about mass gathering events, you think about managing people a lot. And so whenever you can remove people from the hazard, then you've reduced the risk. So risks and hazards. So once you start planning your event and you're looking at all the different activities and you look at who's your audience, are we dealing with kids? Are we dealing with adults or families? Is it going to be in the daytime? Is it going to be at nighttime? Is it going to be near a beautiful water body? Could that be the ocean, or is that a pond, or is that a fast flowing river? We start making lists of all the potential hazards and risks. And then we try to assign, like the likelihoods: low, moderate, high, consequence, low, moderate, high. And so you don't necessarily have to have exact numbers. That a low likelihood and a low consequence is going to be a low risk. And as you're working through your list, you might find things that have a high likelihood and a high risk. Well, those are the ones that you're going to want to mitigate. And so mitigation is basically looking at that equation and reducing the probability of something happening or reducing the consequence. And so one couple great examples from the last couple of years we've been working with in the pandemic, think about masks. What do masks do? Do they reduce the likelihood or the consequence? Masks reduce the likelihood of disease transmission, right? So masks reduce the likelihood. What about social distancing? Does that affect the consequence or the likelihood? Social distancing, again, reduces the ability for disease transmission. So it's also to do with likelihood. Well, how about vaccinations? So vaccinations reduce the severity of the illness. And so vaccination affects the consequence. So we've been doing risk mitigation all along the last 2 years. And that's how it works. You either reduce the likelihood or the consequence, or you can work on both and determine to an acceptable level. So one of the areas that I wish to highlight about hazard and risk with live outdoor events is weather. BC has had its fair share of weather-related emergencies and disasters over the last number of years. And I've had a lot of conversations with senior folks in emergency positions, and we all kind of agree that weather is the single greatest hazard to affect a live event because it's so broad. And so what kind of hazards can we see with weather? Well, there's heat, wind, rain, lightning, and then there's secondary impacts such as flooding or forest fires or smoke. So yeah, weather. What are the risks? The risks are you have heat-related illnesses, hypothermia, electrocution from lightning strikes, respiratory problems from smoke, trauma from debris falling, for example, during a storm or windy weather. So there's weather and weather. So for those of you who hold live events, outdoor events, I'm placing the seed about weather. And so here's a couple of little resources that I wanted to share with you. Environment Canada is great. It has the broadest system of weather stations all across Canada, and they provide all sorts of great weather. You can see in the image below, that's a shot of radar, and so that's providing information about the amount of rainfall that's potentially about to occur. There's a great weather office app, and I've added that as a link in the reference documents. And another great one is called another great app is called My Lightning Tracker and alerts. And so you can actually set up a radius around your event, and it will send you a notification if there's lightning in your vicinity. And so pretty slick, and it's all free too. So weather is not the sort of thing that you can always just, depending on the complexity of your event, you may find that using an app on your phone might not be sufficient enough. We have an incredible support system here in BC. Events can tap into the BC Wildfire Service weather system, and the whole province is broken down into regions. And especially during fire season, there are often daily weather briefings that you can call into and provide, where you get really great, accurate local information about the weather in your vicinity. Another great resource that I've used in the past is you can call a meteorologist at the Vancouver airport at the number listed below, and they will give you your own personal weather briefing if you want to know more about the weather in your vicinity. They're there for that reason. So definitely add that into your contacts list. So we've done the first two ingredients, and we finished the big number two because that's where we put most of our emphasis on pre-planning. But the next ingredient is relationships. And there's a lot of benefits to working with someone you know and who knows you. And, relationships are that foundation to trust. Remember when you crashed on your bike, when you went running home to your mom? You know that she would rescue you, bursting into tears, and mom would just know how to fix everything. Well, those are the kinds of relationships that you want to have. When things go unexpectedly, you want to be able to know who's going to come to help support you. And so, it's a great also conversation starter if you're developing a new event, because everyone is interested in maintaining health and well-being. and everyone wants to prevent and reduce harm. So it's a great starting point when you want to create a new relationship, within a community with your event. And once you've established these relations, you'll also be on their radar. And in this process of developing a relationship, you help each other understand how you'll work together in the event that there is an emergency. And once you have those strong relations, then you open yourselves up to feedback and support and approvals. Have to say that, especially when you're setting up an event in a new location, it's the local knowledge that can provide you with all that really great detail to help direct your efforts in the planning phases. And then sometimes, it's great. There will also be opportunities where you and they can be able to receive endorsement and support for different things. So relationships are really important because you want to know that when things kind of go awry or things get challenging, then you've got your friends to come and help you out. So here is a potential list of partners that you could be potentially working with. Take a screenshot. A great place to start is at a municipal or regional emergency program committee. So basically there's an emergency committee, a part of almost every region or municipality. And there's always key representatives from all the emergency groups that sit at the table. So it's a great place to start and work on those relations. And perhaps you give a presentation on your event to that committee and then look for their feedback. But yeah, so you can see, I've already mentioned the BC Wildfire Service, and their weather information is incredible. Fire departments, police services and RCMP, emergency social services, victim services, Emergency Management BC is another excellent resource. They're connected to absolutely everything. Perhaps you may want to also connect with the ambulance service. If it's a larger event, you may even connect with the local hospitals. When you've got a lot of traffic coming and going to your event, then you'll also be working with the Ministry of Transportation. But yeah, so there's a starting list for some relationships to develop for your event. The fourth ingredient of the 7 that I've mentioned is documentation. So this is the paper, this is the electronic document. And why do we have documentation? For accountability and due diligence. We also want to document our relationships, and we're going to have a really thorough, up-to-date contact lists. And then lastly, we have documentation as a reference guide, and I'll be speaking more about that in a couple more slides. So documentation. Here's another slide that you can totally take a screenshot of. This would be, these are the headings that you could have in a basic emergency plan, like as a template. But where I really want to hone in on is the 4 headings that are in orange font. These are the key headings. And I'll show you why in a moment. So communication, an emergency procedures area, a site map, and a contact list. So let's talk about communication. So you can see along the top of this slide here, there is a whole workflow here. Good relationships lead to good communication, which means you have good information exchange, which leads to a greater understanding, which leads to better decision making, which ends up with a more effective response. Now, if you take my little image there on the right hand side and you put poop or crap into any of those, into that chain, as soon as your relationships are crappy, your communication is going to be crappy, your information exchange is going to be crappy, you're going to lead to more confusion, and it's going to lead to poor decision making or knee-jerk decision making, and ultimately an ineffective response that could end up also being very costly. So communication is really, really important. And so when we talk about communication, we also talk about our targets. Who are we targeting? Well, targets for communication could be our attendees, our staff and volunteers, the media, our partners and stakeholders. So you're going to have different kinds of communication for different kinds of targets. This is a really great time to bring in your marketing team if you have a marketing team, because they're going to be really crucial, especially if you need some sort of crisis communications. So there's different kinds of targets in your communications. There's also different kinds of communications. There's face-to-face communications. We can communicate on the phones. We can have VHF radios. We can have social media. We can use a loudspeaker, but know all your different kinds of the communications that you're going to use for all your different targets. And if something is really, really, really important, then we add what we call redundancies. So what happens if the cell tower goes out? What happens if your batteries go dead on your radio? Well, you want to think about backups for these things, whether you've got spare batteries or just an alternate form of communication. We have had a phone line, a crucial phone line go down at the festival in the past, but we actually had a satellite phone so that we could speak with the hospital. So redundancy. So when something's really, 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 really important, like communication, then it's important to consider having some sort of backup plan. Another really cool resource for you to consider is that there's mass texting software out there. So when you've got a large team and you need to get some key messaging out, you can set up mass texting software and you can text 1,000 people simultaneously. We have 2,500 staff and volunteers at Shambhala. And so we use this One Call Now mass texting software when we really need to get a message to everyone quickly. So that's communication. The second of those 4 really important parts of an emergency plan is to have a site map. And so if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then I'd say a map is worth 10,000 or 100,000, because they're really informative and they're multi-purpose. And so 2 people in 2 different locations can be looking at the same map and agree that they're looking at the same location. And so, for example, if you have like an alphanumeric grid across your map, you don't even have to know where a place is. You can say, I'm at E1. I'm at the front gate at E1. So being able to know your site really, really well, or be able to, like, for example, maybe you need to direct an ambulance to a certain part of your site and you hand them a map as they come onto site. So maps are really great guides. You can go super simplistic, and I'm also going to show you super complicated. But the super simplistic, if you're familiar with, is I use Google Earth Pro, and I'll show you an example in a moment of Google Earth Pro, and it's free, and you can make your map right then and there. And then I'm going to show you the other end of the spectrum. So if you're at a large, multi-year, large-scale mass gathering event, you can invest in more mapping products because you return to the same location every year. If you want, you can take a screenshot of some of the important map attributes, the things that are really important to have on a map, like your evacuation routes or where your first aid post is. But yeah, take a screenshot there. And then I'm going to show you what Google Earth looks like.
So can I just ask Simon, and something that comes up in my world a little bit is whether we put muster points on site maps and make them known. And I guess kind of in the background realm, it's kind of lone shooter scenario. People are worried about identifying where people might evacuate to in the case of an emergency, because that information may be used against them for somebody with terrible. I was just wondering what your thought on that was.
Yeah, no, we put muster points on our maps, and that's actually how we get our first aid services to people in the crowd really quickly. Is we've identified all these different muster points. And so, and you can, if it's like on the public map, you can make them look really cool and friendly and happy. And so, but yeah, so you're right. There is a certain level of detail that you want to go with, and you may want to separate that detail between your staff and your volunteers versus the public. But yeah, so excellent question. Did that feel like that answered that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm getting thumbs up and enthusiasm about the response as well. So that's good. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everybody. That's awesome. So Google Earth Pro. Yeah, don't get Google Earth Pro. Pro comes with some extra tools. This is a event I did in my local town. It was like for 300 people. And you can see that there's a drawing tool. And so I drew my fence line, and here's my beer tent. This is where my stage was. You can see where all our exits and entry points are, and where the porta potties were going to be. But yeah, so this is an example of a really simple site map. And some of the cool things that you get with Google Earth Pro is there's a measurement tool. So you can measure how much fence you need to rent. You can measure that out. And it also takes areas as well. So you can determine what's the square footage of your beer tent. And so Google Earth Pro is a great and simple free tool for making maps. At the other end of the spectrum, just to show you all the cool things that can be done, at Shambhala, we do daily drone imagery and we use GIS mapping products. So you can see we've laid out all of our roads, and then we fly a drone over each day to show how the city is growing, so that we can determine if we have any pinch points, or so that our fire lanes remain open. And so it enables us to go have a quick so it's like a real-time map, and then we can actually project it up onto a large LCD screen TV and be able to have a real-time image of how the city is expanding and contracting. Because 20,000 people coming and going over a week, the sites, the ground see a lot of change. But and this is not very expensive either at that. But that's one of the cool things that you can do these days on a larger scale. So we've talked about communications, and we've talked about maps, emergency procedures. So in the event of an emergency, you do not want to be opening your emergency plan and reading it. What you want to do is convey your emergency procedures in a flowchart, because you don't want to read, you just want to figure out, okay, what I need to do. And so in emergency procedures, people need to know what their roles are. So know what the procedures are and know where their roles are. And so I've got an example right here. And so this might be a little bit on the tiny side for people to read, but definitely take a screenshot. But more or less, you can see on the left-hand side. So it's basically when something happens, you go to your procedures and you follow simple instructions. And so you can see on the left-hand side, roles. So we've got festival attendees, we've got field staff and volunteers, and then we've got supervisors, management, the emergency team, and then eventually reaching out to external supports. So, most likely you're a staff member or a volunteer, so you know where you are in that chart. So you need to get this information to a supervisor, to your supervisor. And so it's where are you in the chain? And so you can see sort of in that tiny writing, we have a initial incident report. And so we make these into stickers and they go on the back side of everyone's IDs. And so if you ever end up in emergency, you know what to do. You know to assess the scene to make certain that you're safe before you enter it. Make certain you're going to convey some information. So you're going to need your name and your role. And maybe if you have a call sign, you need to know where you are. So your location, the nature or concern for the emergency. And then if you're with a reporting person, that you hold on to that person. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to send a pro to you to help you evaluate the circumstance. So that is a simple set of instructions, easy to follow when suddenly you find yourself in a situation. So flowcharts, really, really handy. And we post these everywhere, backstage, in HR, everywhere.
Hi, Simon. Sorry for the interruption. Just for a question regarding communication and flowcharts is that in some of our venues, people talk about using codes to alert for situations, whether it's in the house or whatever. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on where codes on the radio calls, for example, fit in.
That's a good question because there's pros and cons to both. You can use codes as long as everybody, and I mean absolutely everybody, has to understand them. And as soon as somebody doesn't know what a code is, what a code means, then that can lead to a lot of problems. On the other side of things, when you do provide confidential information across a system, whether it's a radio, depending on the vocabulary that you use, can either can cause concern. So I guess it can go either way. So again, it depends on how comfortable your team is. And so if you, for example, maybe you put the codes on the sticker on your ID so that everyone all knows the codes. So it can go either way, but you just really want to make certain that people know what they're talking about when you do use a code. But that was an excellent question. So
thanks. I was just going to say it might be the same because we're getting a bit of back and forth on the chat about whose preferred mapping system for different things and stuff like that. So there seem to be some solutions that are in line with yours and a little bit of promotion of different ones, but whatever gets you there.
Good. Yeah, exactly. As long as you've got a map, that's all that matters for sure. There's maps are what the bottom line is, and there's all sorts of great products out there, and there's all sorts of free stuff as well. But so
great. Thanks.
Yeah. So from the 4, we've done communications and we've done maps and we've done the flow charts. And so the last component that you want to have in every single emergency plan is a contact list. And so, it's really important for me to emphasize that having a thorough and up-to-date contact list is going to really save you, really can really help support you in your times of need. It's also a great relationship builder. It builds confidence with your partners and stakeholders when you spell their names correctly and get their titles correct as well, because often we'll share our emergency plans with our partners. And so, yeah, so having an up-to-date contact list. But so when you're in trouble, don't hesitate to call the cavalry. Large-scale emergency response takes time to assemble, and emergencies can grow exponentially, and a strong response early on can often nip things in the bud. And, you know, we all know that seconds can save lives. And so another phone number that I'm sharing with you here that I want you to put in all your plans, especially for the big events, is the Emergency Management BC switchboard. This is your one-stop shop for all emergencies. And so the second point I have here is, you know, when do you use the EMBC switchboard versus 911? Well, it really, again, you will have determined what's the better option in your pre-planning, but you know, it depends. Like, are you in a major city center or are you in a rural environment? Typically, 911 deals with typical emergencies: police, ambulance, and fire. And so if you have a single person who needs an ambulance, then you're going to call 911. But if you've had a much larger event, then you want to go and you want to use the EMBC switchboard. And they are so connected to absolutely everything that's going on. They'll be really, they're very, very, very supportive. And incidentally, when things go awry, often 911 systems become overwhelmed because the public begins to call all 911 at the same time. So this EMBC switchboard is your connection to the cavalry when you need it. So we're through the documentation and we're back into our ingredients again. So we're at the fifth ingredient of the 7. And so familiarization. You can have the best plan ever, but if your team doesn't know about it, or if they don't understand what their role is, or if they don't know about any of the resources that they require, then your response is not going to be very effective. So it's really important to make certain everyone's familiar. And that's not only with, like, you know, the documents. I mean, that can be the equipment, that can be software. You know, I gave you that Lightning app. You know, you want to fiddle with that Lightning app before, you know, your event day. So you want to be familiar with all this stuff so you know how it all works and how all the systems work. I know nobody likes to do exercises in practice, but that is the best way to learn, is to make mistakes while you're practicing. And it's great for team building because, again, everyone in your organization has a common interest in health and well-being. And so it's a great opportunity to pull the whole team together so you can get HR working with marketing and your production team. So it's a great way to bring everybody all together. It's like, hey, let's do an emergency exercise. Let's do a practice session here. And incidentally, when you do solve problems and you do practice together, it also, and when you solve problems together and overcome conflict together, you totally increase the trust and confidence within your team. So just by practicing emergency stuff, there's a great opportunity for actually your team to come closer together.
So yeah, I did have another question, and actually the slide before, I think I was a little bit slow, and that was whether EMBC works outside of cell service, or if you're in a rural area, whether EMBC would be able to be contacted.
Yeah, I would have to, if you're outside of cell service, then I would, yeah, a satellite phone. Like I've only worked with them through the switchboard, and that was through a telephone. And so a satellite phone would be the plan B if you don't have a cell service. Or, I mean, hopefully or maybe a landline if there's a landline, but yes, sat phone. If you're having a large scale event that's outside of cell service, then you would definitely want to have a sat phone handy, and they're not very expensive to rent these days. They're pretty reasonable. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can find that to go back to your exercising point, right? Exercising or practicing what you're going to be doing, you're going to find out pretty fast. People will know when the cell service is out pretty fast, I think. So that's great.
That's a really good point, Will. That actually brings something to mind. If you don't have very good cell service at your event, I would consider contacting the local cell provider. I know this for a fact because we had terrible cell service at Shambhala for many years, and we contacted TELUS, and TELUS erects a portable cell tower on site, and now everyone can communicate, and it's free because they're just providing a service. So it's a benefit to all. So if you've got poor cell service, don't hesitate to reach out to the local cell provider. You might just be able to get your own portable cell tower.
And actually, just while we're on the same topic, I got another question. And whether 911 and EMBC are kind of in conversation with each other. So if you call one, do they automatically update the first response group, and vice versa?
That's a great question. I would say that 911 what happens with 911 is police, ambulance, and fire. So basically, you need police, ambulance, or fire to be on scene to say, holy crow, this is way outside of what we can manage. We need more. And so it's about that information gathering phase. And so whereas with EMBC, EMBC it sees things from a higher perspective, and they would be able to go. Yeah, I'd say EMBC is more of a large scale blanket sort of support. They would be, for example, they would call the local emergency program coordinator. And so, for example, if you needed to set up, so maybe you had to evacuate. It's something that's totally plausible. With your local emergency program coordinator in knowledge of what's going on, he can help work with the municipality to declare a state of emergency and also open an emergency operations center to deal with the evacuees. So yeah, I guess again, 911 is more, think about 911 as being city and more of your typical emergencies, and EMBC is more of your large scale, not your typical, but it's going to take a little bit of time for 911 to reach EMBC because they're used to just dealing with police, ambulance, and fire, if that makes sense. So
it sounds like a little bit it's decided upon what the capacity of what you think the police would be able to manage for you. And when you're beyond, whatever, if you're in a small town, it might only be one police car and one ambulance available 15 minutes down the road, aside from what you've already contracted for site. And once it starts growing beyond that, then you have to start. Maybe that's something you put in your plan, right? You would
absolutely, and that's also why it's great to do your homework to know that there's only one RCMP constable in town. So we might need to think about something. Well, think about it in advance if you need more than one RCMP at the time. So that's doing great homework. So
perfect. Relationships, right?
Yeah, it's all about relationships. It's so true. So we're at number 6. of 7, activation and response. And so you can see when the poop hits the fan, what do? If you don't know what to do, then go to your references and go to your flowchart and look up your communications. Look, you have your maps and there's your contacts. So when you don't know what to do and something happens, go straight to those 4 key areas, starting with the flowchart, and that will help you find your pathway of what you're going to do. And again, once you start getting good information, or once you start having good communication about what's happening, then you start getting good information, which leads to good decision making and an effective response. So the last portion, the last ingredient of our emergency management omelet is being able to evaluate and maintain. And so there's sort of like, you want to, so evaluate and maintain. So after stuff has happened, we want to sit down and figure out what happened and learn our lessons from it, and then be able to inject it into next year's plan to make it stronger. This is a great slide for you to take a screenshot of. This is what we call an after action review. And after every single emergency, whether it's a house fire or a tsunami, we use these 4 questions to do our after action reviews. What was planned? What actually happened? Why did it happen? And instead of focusing on who did things right or wrong, we just talk about what. And then lastly, we say, what did we learn? You know, what can we do? What did we learn so we can do things better? So those are the 4 questions that we use in every single after action review that you can use across the board. So not only do we need to evaluate our plans, we also really need to, I wanted to touch upon briefly about maintaining our people. And, you know, sometimes when things happen that, you know, are outside of our control, you know, the outcomes aren't desirable, you know, we can experience psychological injury from the trauma of an event, and post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, we've been hearing about it. You know, we've been looking at all the frontline workers the last 2 years in the health industry. When we have a traumatic event, we want to bring in a counselor who can do a critical incident stress debriefing, and you try to do that as soon as possible, right after. And, you know, these psychological injuries can impact us in all sorts of weird and wacky ways. But so I really want to encourage folks to reach out. There's all sorts of incredible supports, whether it's through counseling. If you've heard of EMDR, there's all these amazing tools and techniques out there to help us overcome psychological trauma. Which, you know, sometimes happens. So yeah, not only do we need to evaluate and maintain our plans, we need to evaluate and maintain our people. So I've got about I've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to run you through a really quick case study just to kind of pull everything together. What I've been talking about for the last 50 minutes. So here we are. We've got a outdoor music festival during the summer with thousands of attendees who are camping. And you've got hundreds of staff and volunteers, and you seem to have a severe thunderstorm in the forecast. And so how does this unfold? Well, because you've got great relationships, you get a phone call directly from Environment Canada to say, hey, it's kind of looking like you guys could experience a severe thunderstorm in a day or two here. And then you're looking at your apps, and sure enough, son of a gun, your apps are saying the same thing too. Your you're sitting in on the weather briefings with the BC wildfire, and they're saying severe. And so it's like, you've got information coming, you've got communications, and you've got information coming in. So you can help kind of think about it and plan. I think like we're going to have to prepare to deal with the severe thunderstorm during our festival. So we move into problem solving mode. All right. Hazards. I'm just going to focus in on one hazard just for the sake of our time. But yeah, so severe thunderstorm, you could destructive winds. That could mean you could have trees falling over and people being harmed from falling debris. So we're going to have to think about that. So we go to our map and you look and it's like, yeah, our whole area of our downtown area where all our stages are is all in treed areas. But where everybody's camping is all on a big open field. So if we want to reduce the likelihood and the consequence, what we need to do is be able to move people away from the hazards to reduce the risk. So what do? We start opening all our communication channels. We've got our app and we're sending messages to our attendees to say, hey, in the event of a storm, we want you to walk back to your camp and just stay in place. And so we're preparing our attendees. We're communicating with our staff in the event. This is your role. This is what we want you to do. And so we're getting the information out to all our different targets to help them prepare to understand what their role is going to be in the event that we need to do something about it. And so, the E word comes up, evacuation. It's not a word that we all like to have to use, but, we can delay programming. But yeah, obviously moving people away from the hazardous of the trees potentially coming down is probably the best way for us to manage to reduce the risk. So now we're monitoring the weather, and I pull out my lightning tracker system and look at that. You can see where we actually are on the day of is that little blue dot just south of Salmo. That's our festival. And there's a massive storm, and those are all the lightning strikes. And that one's missed us because I think it was like a 40 to 60% chance. So it's like, maybe it will, maybe it won't. The weather, they can be wrong half the time and still keep their job. So there you are. There we're seeing lightning and we're seeing what's looking like a severe storm, but we haven't experienced it yet. But we're monitoring and we're continuing to gather information. And it's getting later on into the evening, and we're looking to the south of us, and these storms are tracking from the States into Canada, and we see a big blob and that's coming in, and you can see on the left-hand side that's the severity, and it's looking moderate, and then you're seeing little pockets of severe. I'm like, whoa, I think I am almost at the maximum capacity of what I feel I can manage for making decisions. So I'm going to call a specialist. I'm going to call that forecaster at the Vancouver airport. And what did they do? He analyzed this storm as it was tracking towards us, as it passed every airport, and he determined that there were no destructive winds in this storm. It was a dissipating thunderstorm, and that we were just going to receive a lot of rain. So we're not going to have to evacuate our downtown area, we're not going to have to evacuate our downtown area at nighttime, at peak party when the substances are flowing. And so what do we decide? We decide not to evacuate. And what was the outcome? It was the sweetest, most awesome visuals when the rain came down so hard and the lasers and the lights. And so this story tells you that we had good relationships. We had good communication. We had good information transfer, which helped us lead to good decision making, which we felt was the right outcome. We did not We did not evacuate the downtown area at night when when the party was at its peak, because we felt that the risks of evacuating people at night what had apparent risks as well. And so it all worked out. And so when you have good information, it makes your decision making a lot easier. And so whereas when you don't have information, that's when you make knee-jerk reactive decisions. And so in summary, these are the 7 principal ingredients to emergency planning. And I hope you found it informative, and I hope you can agree with me that there are benefits to planning, that I've provided you with some tools and resources that you can hopefully use, and that emergency planning is easier than you think. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Simon. And thank you for everybody who participated in the chat through questions or comments. Together, we put on a pretty fantastic session. I know out of there that I'll be sharing with groups as I move forward as well. So thank you very much to Simon for coming by. I know you can't see everybody applauding, but I'm sure they're jazz handsing like mad. That's how we roll. I just want to throw out a quick reminder to everybody else. Simon's information has just been dropped in the chat again. You can download any of those links, and I'm sure he's readily available at different times. Yeah, also we've got a reminder for bingo coming up. There's going to be winner chicken dinner. There's a TV, there's a tablet, there's AirPods up for grabs through the bingo. That starts at 3:45. We have a stretch break right now that's going to be presented by StageFab, a wonderful sponsor. You can see a slide on there. And we look forward to seeing you in the final sessions that are upcoming. And I'm told here that I'm supposed to promote my own. So show up and let's talk about what you're looking at. Thanks everybody for coming by.
Thanks everyone. Totally appreciate it. All the best.